Morning, everyone. Thanks for being here. Good to see you. Really quick introduction before we dive in. I am Jamie, founder of Neurosight. Since 2008, I've specialised in assessment and selection, meaning I've been building end-to-end assessment and selection processes from application to offer, including structured interviewing assessment centres, bespoke psychometric tests. And during that period of time, I've been fortunate enough to partner with over 40 of the UK's top 100 employers, building and validating those processes. What that insight has hopefully provided me is access to real insights and real data around what works, what doesn't work, where best practice is going, and what we can do as professionals working in this field to enhance both our TA functions, candidate experience, and hiring outcomes. This session is, I hope it will be fascinating and at times a little bit challenging, appropriately challenging, because the uncomfortable truth is that hiring processes have both directly and indirectly discriminated against neurodivergent individuals for a long time. And I'll share some shocking statistics today on that. But I don't just want to be here as the kind of voice of doom saying, oh, this is terrible. I'm also going to share step-by-step some actionable strategies, evidence-based, that you can take away and potentially implement in your own hiring processes that have worked well elsewhere. So I hope that'll be interesting. Before I do that, I'm not going to do the hard sell, right? This is, you're not here to listen to me selling to you. But I would like to share just a little bit of an introduction and also a little bit of information around the kind of outcomes we drive for employers. That will take no more than a few minutes, and then we'll dive straight into why you're here, which is how we build a neuro-inclusive hiring process. So in terms of what we'll talk about today, we'll begin after the introduction to Neurosight with an introduction to neurodivergence. There are some differences in opinion around how it's defined and how we should categorize it, and the barriers these individuals face to employment. We'll then move on to talk about the unique strengths, the evidence-based strengths that neurodivergent individuals can bring to the workplace, because this isn't just a moral question of doing the right thing. There's also a compelling, as I'll share, business case for making your hiring processes more neuro-inclusive, and I'll share some stats from some leading employers. We'll then challenge some hiring conventions. So what's working well and what isn't working well, and what do we need to potentially think about doing differently? And we'll conclude with some key takeaways, and I hope some time for questions. So why am I here today? My experience in assessment and selection, designing end-to-end processes, taught me one thing that I really took away with, which is that while employers can often get their interviews and their assessment centres and their application forms into a pretty good place, I consistently saw employers struggling with psychometric testing and online assessments. The data is really clear on this. These assessments, by and large, do not work by any reasonable definition of the word. And I say that as someone who's built and validated well over 50 in major employers in the last 15 years, and I've seen all the data. And what I'm sharing with you is common knowledge in the industry, by the way. The accuracy of them is very low. They often don't measure the things they claim to measure for reasons we'll go. The completion time is often very long. The dropout rate or non-completion rate is very high. And when you look at the people who don't complete or drop out, it's often those from lower socioeconomic backgrounds, people who maybe don't have a quiet place at home to study, people who maybe have caring responsibilities and struggle to find the time to complete those kind of assessments. There is often a negative impact, therefore, on social mobility. They are not neurodiverse friendly for reasons we'll describe, and they're easy to cheat with tools like ChatGPT. And it's against these challenges that Neurosight was born. Conventional tests score your answers. That's all they do. They work like questionnaires. But think about some questions that you might want to ask of someone completing an online test. Are they faking it? Are they using an AI tool? Is anxiety impacting their performance? Are they confident or hesitant? Was it an easy or difficult decision? You cannot answer any of those questions if you're just scoring the answer. So what we do instead is we apply advances in neuroscience to understand the real-time journey that people take to make their decisions. And that does a couple of things. It collects vastly more data, which allows us to reduce the length of the assessment very considerably. What it also does is hugely improve the accuracy and the accessibility, because we're able to understand how people are arriving at their decisions. And if you are neurodivergent, if you take a bit longer to read the responses because you are, for example, dyslexic, if you have a different way of expressing your confidence because you have autism or dyspraxia, that will be detected and accommodated. But we're really conscious that to do something like launch a new form of bespoke psychometric test, which is a high-risk intervention for employers that can screen people in or out of process, you need to make sure it works. And so we underwent a 2-year validation program in collaboration with a prominent Canadian university and over 1,000 individuals to confirm that what we were doing worked. So this wasn't dropped out of nowhere. Now, we only commercially launched 2 years ago, but in that time, I'm pleased to say we're already supporting a broad range of customers across a broad range of industries. And I'd love to just briefly share some of the real-world outcomes we're obtaining. And this includes world-leading accuracy. When we replaced Grant Thornton's conventional online assessment, we increased accuracy by 4 times, while reducing the completion time from 1 hour to 5 minutes. We've achieved award-winning diversity outcomes, empowering social mobility and neurodiversity. We've empowered exceptional quality of hire. A cohort of 297 technical apprentices at Sellafield achieved a 99.7% success rate at probation, which was unheard of previously. And we're delivering an exceptional candidate experience with a completion rate of 99.5% and an NPS, which is an expression of how candidates feel about the assessment, of +70. Typical psychometric test is +20. So that's the little sales pitch over. Right. So I did promise it would be about 5 minutes, and I think I kept to time there. What we're going to do now is dive into the topic at hand. And where I'd love to start is just a bit of insight into the term neurodiversity, where it came from, some of the accepted definitions and the challenges. And this language is important, because if we're going to talk about neurodiversity at work, then it's helpful to understand the framework and the language that underpins it. So it's a relatively recent term. It was coined in the late 90s by a sociologist called Judith Singer, and it recognizes the neurological differences that are a natural part of human diversity. And what it expresses is that these differences are not defects or disorders, but rather a different way of thinking, a different way of processing information that in actual fact can reap many benefits. There is an ongoing debate. So there is a medical model applied to neurodiversity and a more social model. The medical model will state that these are conditions that require treatment to fix. The social model says, no, hang on a second. Actually, the problem is not the neurodivergence. The problem is the structure of our societies, our institutions, and the way that we build and structure our workplaces and recruitment processes. And it's those that need to change, not the individuals. So I'm not suggesting there's a right or wrong way of viewing that. I'm just showing there are diverse perspectives. But as someone who was diagnosed with autism spectrum disorder myself in 2017, I personally lean towards the social model. I don't feel like I require medical intervention. That's my preference. But, other opinions are available. And understanding this is important because if you or your hiring managers think of neurodiversity as a problem, as something that needs fixing, it can limit your perspectives on neurodiversity and potentially create barriers to employment that don't need to be there. And these barriers to employment are significant. So here are some really concerning statistics. Before we go into these in more detail, I'd just like you to put up your hand if you genuinely, and you have to really mean it, you genuinely care about providing equal employment opportunities for neurodivergent individuals. Put your hand up if you care. Okay, great. We all care. Wonderful. Wonderful. So it's not our desire to do the right thing that's missing. It isn't our intentions that are in the wrong place. So something else must be happening, because how else can we explain a 22% employment rate among autistic adults? That's a shocking statistic. In the US, the CDC estimates as high as 85% unemployment. So if it isn't our good intentions that are lacking, there must be something else going on. Let's explore some of the contributing factors to the high employment rates to neurodivergent individuals. Now, some of these may seem obvious, but they're worth repeating. The social communication challenges that many neurodivergent individuals experience can significantly impact the outcome of a hiring process. Think about factors like small talk or eye contact or body language. How many times have you heard a hiring manager say, there was something off about them, couldn't put my finger on it. They were looking at their feet when they answered the questions, that kind of stuff. That may be completely unrelated to their potential and performance in role, right? And almost certainly would be, unless superficial social behaviors are a critical element of the job. In other words, a genuine occupational requirement, which usually they're not for the vast majority of occupations. There's also heightened anxiety and a potential reluctance to disclose neurodivergence. So people living with a diagnosis may not wish to disclose that diagnosis. And because most selection processes are what they are, our current approach, the traditional approach, says, this is our selection process. If you're neurodivergent, you have to tell us you're neurodivergent, and then we will manually make some adjustments to try and accommodate you. Right? So people feel like they're burdening you, right? That you're making this extra effort. And what I'm going to suggest during this presentation today is that a different approach is possible. That rather than having an inflexible, rigid approach that requires manual accommodation and disclosure, we could build processes that are inherently neuro-inclusive by design, that do not require disclosure, that do not even require somebody to know they're neurodivergent, and they won't be disadvantaged. Now, to achieve that, significant changes would be required across an end-to-end hiring process. But I'm going to make the case now that this is not just a moral question, it's a question around business performance. There is a business case to be made here, because there is significant evidence, both in academic literature and now from employers, that neurodivergent individuals bring unique strengths and abilities to the workplace. That attention to detail, innovative problem solving, intense focus, and quite often you find that leading subject matter experts in any field are neurodivergent, which is an interesting statistic. At SAP, their Autism in Work program found that individuals on the spectrum contributed to better team outcomes and better project outcomes compared to teams that were entirely neurotypical. At EY, their Neurodiversity Centre of Excellence reported enhanced outcomes that drove innovation and improved client satisfaction. So, I'm not standing here saying, look, let's do the right thing for moral reasons, although I am saying that. What I'm saying is that this is, if you hire neurodivergent individuals and create a neurodivergent friendly hiring process, a neuro-inclusive hiring process, your business performance will improve. Your hiring managers will hire better people. Their team performance will improve. That's where the business case lies. So our goal then is to create that neuro-inclusive process, rethinking the hiring process, so we don't require people to be brave enough to disclose their neurodivergence with you. We don't require ourselves as well as TA professionals to create extra work to manually reconfigure these processes for neurodivergent individuals. We could aspire to create a different kind of hiring process, and crucially, a hiring process that is not only neuro-inclusive, but improves outcomes across the board. Because the case that I'm going to make today is this is not a zero-sum game. You don't dial up the accessibility and then reduce the quality of the hire, right? In fact, you can do both at the same time. Let's go through a hiring process end to end and explore how we can support neurodivergent individuals at each step in that process, starting with the application form. So look, many application forms were put together several years ago. I speak to some people and they're not even sure why certain questions are on the form. They can be quite lengthy. Some of the questions don't relate specifically to performance in role or are screened in a fairly unstructured way. What I'm going to suggest is a review of an application form to create an absolutely minimal form is going to deliver some benefits because, and one of the benefits, by the way, is that clever use of AI makes traditional application forms mostly redundant. If you're cleverly using ChatGPT and using it in the right way, then you're not going to be able to ascertain things like written communication skills or technical expertise through an application form anymore. So there's a strong case for evolving them and moving them on anyway. And also offering multiple application form response options. Consider offering audio options, video options, and written options so people can choose the medium that presents them in the best light to you. And outline the clear steps involved in your hiring process up front. This reduces anxiety and allows people to prepare in advance, which is particularly beneficial to certain neurodivergent candidates. And provide confidential channels where people can reach out for advice and guidance if they are neurodivergent without needing to disclose their disability to you. Consider also having a section on your careers site offering proactive guidance to neurodivergent individuals so they don't have to reach out to you to ask questions. It's all there for them. And avoid unnecessary requirements. If you're asking questions in an application form that don't clearly link to job performance or can be easily faked using AI tools, just take them out. They're not serving a useful purpose. Let's now move on to a slightly more challenging topic and a slightly more detailed one. Many employers after application stage, particularly volume, think contact center hires, think volume hires, think apprentice hiring, early careers hiring. The next step in the process is some kind of online test. Also happens for some experienced hires. Online tests are notorious for disadvantaging neurodivergent individuals for a few key reasons. One is they use one-size-fits-all scoring. So if I take a psychometric test and you take a psychometric test, we're scored using an identical algorithm. But even worse than that, many of these tests use something called a norm group. They compare you to a group of people who've completed the test before. What is the problem? They're comparing you, if you're neurodivergent, to a sample of individuals that's likely to be 85% neurotypical. And they're comparing you to those candidates to draw a score. Is that fair? No, of course not. Of course not. There's an obvious answer to that question. The use of norm groups, which many psychometric tests use, including verbal reasoning tests, numerical reasoning tests, logical reasoning tests, almost all of them use norm groups, is a significant barrier to accessibility. Also, be mindful that neurodivergent individuals express heightened anxiety in online assessments, and anxiety reduces performance. I mean, I'm feeling a little bit anxious standing up here talking to you on stage. My palms are a little bit sweaty, my throat's a little bit dry, but imagine the stakes involved for a job that you really want. You're living with that diagnosis. You're aware that you may be disadvantaged by these assessments. Think about your heart pounding. Think about the clock ticking down. You know, what's that going to do to your performance? Is it going to enable you to express your true potential? Maybe not. Maybe not. And there's something else that I need to share with you as well. There was a Court of Appeal ruling in 2019 in the case of BTV Mayer, which found that a conventional type of online assessment that's very commonly used, called a situational judgment test, they go by different names, sometimes situational strengths tests, sometimes workplace simulation. They present workplace scenarios and you select the best and worst options. You'll recognize it if you see it, very common. This type of test was found to illegally discriminate against a candidate with an ASD diagnosis. And what the ruling stated is that the reasonable adjustment should have been not sitting the test and using it to screen them out. So if you are using any kind of situational judgment test, you cannot screen out individuals with an ASD diagnosis. This is a legal precedent. Yeah. So now the challenge with this is that one, some people may not feel comfortable disclosing their diagnosis, but two, many people don't have a diagnosis and are unable to disclose it, even if they suspect that they might be. And it's really surprising how few people are aware of this ruling, which is why I'm mentioning it today. So how do we fix this? In the online testing stage, I can share what we do to fix it. So we use dynamically adaptive algorithms. So when an individual starts one of our online assessments, it doesn't score them using a fixed algorithm comparing them to other people. What happens instead is it learns about them as they go through the assessment. It dynamically accommodates their thinking style, their way of expressing confidence. That accommodates very effectively neurodiversity and anxiety. So individuals scored using a personally tailored algorithm. And the outcomes that we see through that adjustment, through that intervention, is that people don't need to disclose their disability. They don't need to know they're neurodivergent. It is seamless. It happens in the background. And the outcomes that we've seen across all of our employers that we now work with is that neurodivergent individuals frequently overperform neurotypical individuals in these assessments, which when you look at some of the things we're measuring in these assessments, like analytical thinking, makes sense. And yet with conventional tests, they don't overperform. Let's talk now about supporting neurodivergent applicants at interview stage. And let's lay some foundations for success. So educating assessors about neurodiversity and using structured scoring can really help. That's a great first step. If in person, consider lighting. And I'll share a personal anecdote. When I was applying for graduate roles, I had a real issue with sensory overload. And I remember one interview in particular for a job that I really, really wanted. And they put me in this small room with these strip lights above me. And through the whole interview, I just couldn't focus. I was so distracted and overwhelmed by the lights. I couldn't get my words out. My anxiety was through the roof. And if you're not neurodivergent, that might sound a bit silly, but it's a very real experience when you're going through it. And if you're conducting video interviews, consider offering an audio option. Cameras off. And actually, the data around audio-based interviews is great. They're less biased frequently, right? You still get all the evidence that you need. We used to call them telephone interviews back in the day. So, and offer it as an option. So, we don't want this to be a situation where somebody has to disclose a disability to be offered an audio interview. Just offer it as part of the process. Do you want audio or video? A checkbox, right, for everybody. Now, there's a hot debate around sharing interview questions, and there are different perspectives on this. My perspective, and I've looked at a lot of data aligned to interviews and outcomes, is that sharing questions in advance to all candidates, as John Lewis proposes doing, my view on this is it does not advantage neurodivergent candidates. I believe the opposite will occur, because if you're sharing questions to all candidates in advance, who is really going to benefit? Is it neurodivergent individuals or individuals with a panache for memorizing a script and delivering it with flair, convincingly, good actors, in other words? And the evidence, I think, is on my side on this, because there are forms of interviewing that are very predictable, like competency-based interviewing, where people can prepare the answers in advance, and we see neurodivergent candidates underperforming in those interviews. So the evidence, unfortunately, isn't with John Lewis on this, despite their very good intentions. And when it comes to assessment centers, if you do run assessment centers, there are significant barriers to navigating group dynamics, networking activities, unpredictable scenarios. So if you're running in-person centers, consider offering a quiet room that candidates can recharge between exercises. And, don't say, when you start the center, it's probably not a good idea to say, oh, by the way, if you're neurodivergent and need a special room, it's over there. Just suggest to all candidates that if they want to recharge, have a glass of water, you've set a quiet room aside, you can prepare for the next session, right? We're talking about making it neuro-inclusive, so that anybody with a diagnosis or not feels like they can use that space. And pay attention to the physical environment, bright lighting, sound. If you're conducting assessment centers in large open plan offices, that can be sometimes problematic. And here are a few tips. Consider group exercises. Let me tell you something. I've designed, I don't know how many group exercises, and validated them and implemented them. I've seen all the data aligned to tens, if not hundreds of thousands of completions in group exercises. They do not measure collaboration. They do not measure collaboration. This is what they measure: social adaptability and rapport building. Think about the behaviors you see in a group exercise. Oh, I'll keep the time. I'll write the notes. That's a great point. Let's build on that. It's acting. It's social adaptability. People know what to expect. They read up about it. That isn't collaboration. Collaboration is better measured through a paired exercise, where two people sit down together, both have to speak, and they work through a problem together, right? That is collaboration. And the great thing about a paired exercise is, often in a group exercise, it isn't just collaboration you're looking for. You're also looking for things like maybe problem solving, adaptability, and so on. But if you're anxious and you're not talking, you're not going to provide evidence for any of those traits in the group exercise. You'll score badly across everything the group exercise measures, even if you are actually have great strengths in those areas, but your social anxiety is preventing you from demonstrating your strengths. I don't think that's fair. I've got various. I do have a strong opinion about this, but it's based on evidence, right? Group exercises do not do what they claim to do. Consider using paired exercises. And if superficial social behaviors like social adaptability, small talk, and rapport building, if they're not actually important and critical in role, don't measure them. Don't make it a requirement that those behaviors are demonstrated to attain a good outcome. And consider sharing the structure and the timetable of the day in advance so people can prepare for it. And then post-assessment center or post-final interview, try, if you can, to offer clear, constructive feedback to reduce anxiety, provide the outcome quickly, engage in a proactive dialogue. So post-offer, offer a second opportunity for disclosure. People may not feel comfortable disclosing their diagnosis in the selection process, but they may feel comfortable after you've offered them the role. So that way you can plan their onboarding. Consider also sharing their structured onboarding plan well in advance so they know what's heading their way. So to summarize then, the difference between a traditional and a neuro-inclusive process is that a conventional hiring process is one size fits all, take it or leave it. You need to disclose your neurodiversity to us. We will then make manual adjustments. Will make you feel uncomfortable. A neuro-inclusive hiring process is flexible and accommodating by design. You do not need to disclose your neurodiversity. You do not even need to know that you're neurodiverse. And look, this isn't just going to improve outcomes for neurodivergent candidates. What the evidence suggests is this improves outcomes for all candidates and improves quality of hire. So some key takeaways. Review your end-to-end hiring process through that neuro-inclusive lens and aspire for neuro-inclusivity by design. And be prepared to be bold, and it may require you to challenge internal stakeholders on their ways of thinking, but there's a really compelling business case for doing so. I'm conscious of time, and I'd love to leave a bit of time for questions, but I hope that was helpful. I hope it was insightful. But for now, I'll wrap up and open for questions. Thank you.